All living creatures, including us humans, have the same building block which defines who we are as an organism. This building block is called a DNA. It's basically a molecule that's in our cell that defines what happens in our bodies. You might have heard this before, but all the physical characteristics that you have, including your height, the color of your hair, your facial structure, the color of your eyes, basically everything is coded in this DNA. So let's spend some time talking about DNA and understanding what it is. DNA is a molecule in our cells which is double helical in structure. Each strand is made up of these alternating blocks, each block connected to a base. And the bond between these bases is the connection that builds this DNA. Each strand has a backbone made up of alternating phosphate and sugar groups, each attached to a particular base. Now this base is really important. There are of 4 kinds actually: adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine. These bases come in pairs, so if one strand has A, then the opposite one is going to have T. If it has C, then the opposite one is going to have G, and so on. And a particular combination of these bases is the code that I was talking about earlier. Perhaps this particular combination would define that your hair color is going to be black, as opposed to it being brown or blonde or red or any other color. Now that we've understood the significance of DNA, you might be wondering how and when this character-defining DNA is created. Actually, your DNA is created when you are conceived. When the reproductive cells from your parents combine, the DNA from your father gets combined with the DNA of your mother in order to form the DNA that's in the fetus that later becomes you. But the thing is, this particular process that I just mentioned is not perfect. This is when mutation can occur. Mutation is random inevitability. So even though it was DNA from your dad being combined with the DNA from your mom to form this new code that's you, some letters in this code will just randomly change. Mutation can also occur when your cells are dividing, and it can also be caused due to radiation. This change in your code can have small consequences, like your hair color being different than your parents, or it can actually have major consequences like development of cancerous cells. These changes because of mutation brings us to our next topic, which is natural selection. Natural selection is basically what happens when mutation occurs in respect to a particular environment or ecosystem. To explain natural selection, I'm going to take an example of polar bears. The thing is, these bears in the polar region started out like any other bears. They had brown fur. As these animals went through different generations, like any other animal, they had mutations, but none of them were significant. But then came this cub. The unique feature about this cub was that it had white fur as opposed to the brown fur that you see in other bears. This white fur in a snowy, cold, white environment meant that this cub actually had an advantage over the others. When this cub would grow up, it would have significant advantage in terms of finding food because it could camouflage with the environment. And when this bear reproduces, some of its cubs are also going to have white fur. Now, we have the same number of resources as before, but there is one group that has significant advantage in gaining those resources. Eventually, the bears with brown fur are gonna go extinct in that area. This doesn't happen immediately though. This happens over the course of several generations of both the bears with white fur and the bears with brown fur. And the other thing to consider is that these bears are not reproducing with natural selection in mind. They're not trying to find bears with white furs knowing these advantages exist. It's just that if bears do reproduce and give birth to a cub with white fur, it has a better chance of survival. And again, this wasn't planned. The cub could have easily had green, red, or even yellow fur. It just happened that this particular mutation caused a white fur and natural selection just played its part. This fact is what I find missing in most news articles. They undermine this randomness. At its core, it's random mutations that are causing all these changes that are resulting in evolution. And survival is just a side effect of this. But what if we could? What if we could actually replicate what this randomness is doing? One of our attempts has been selective breeding. It's perhaps true that the farmers who were practicing selective breeding were not completely aware of mutations, but they did realize that crossbreeding certain animals or plants caused their offsprings to have better traits, at least in regards to the traits that humans were looking for. And because of this, we have corn that used to look like this, but now looks like this, and chicken that used to look like this, and now looks like this. Selective breeding, while not directly working with genes, is still a product of our understanding of evolution. This still doesn't include a conscious alteration of genes. But what if we could? This is where we reach gene editing. Gene editing is exactly what it sounds like. It's finding a portion of the gene that you want to edit and edit it the way you want. The major breakthrough in gene editing has been with the discovery of CRISPR, clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. There's an excellent documentary on Netflix called Human Nature that talks about CRISPR in detail if you're interested. The documentary talks about how this DNA sequence was found in genomes of prokaryotic organisms such as bacteria. This DNA sequence had fragments that repeated many times and they were regularly interspaced. And between each repeat, we have codes that look different, and these are called spacers. Now, what scientists observed was that when a bacteria is attacked by a virus, the bacteria keeps note of the virus's DNA, and it makes a copy of a portion of the virus's DNA in its own DNA as a spacer. This new spacer now acts like a wanted poster that's sent to CRISPR, specifically to the Cas9 protein in CRISPR. Now, when the virus comes back, CRISPR scans the DNA from this virus and searches for the wanted poster. And if at any point the virus's DNA matches the spacer that it's searching for, it cuts off the DNA. You see this protein that I've been talking about in CRISPR? This Cas9 protein is programmable. I can create a custom RNA that will help me find a particular DNA, send it to Cas9, and CRISPR will take care of the rest of it. It will find that DNA, and then it can edit this DNA to anything that we want. And now this brings us to a discussion about our future. We are now able to control this mutation. In other words, we won't be waiting for randomness anymore. We will be able to change our DNA to fit our purpose. Now that's where we really need ethics. What should actually be our purpose? There are some clear and obvious answers here. Should we use it to inactivate cancerous cells? Yes. Should we use it to reduce pain for patients who cannot be cured? Yes. Should we use it to cure genetic diseases? Yes. But there are a lot of questions we do not have an answer for. Should CRISPR be used to make humans taller? to change their facial features or perhaps make them more intelligent? Your first instinct might be to say no, because it kind of sounds unnecessary. But what if they had a bad quality of life that is caused because of these things? There's an additional argument that can be made in favor of intelligence. What if these more intelligent humans bring more discoveries that benefit the humankind? Wouldn't that be worth a shot? Obviously, we also cannot remain naive to the possibility of CRISPR being commercialized or perhaps being used in military against humanity. We can't help but ask the question of what this could cause in the future. Would we have genetically engineered babies, perfect for specific tasks in the society? In that scenario, would these babies be able to have a normal human life? Our evolution has always been defined by a natural selection resulting from random mutations. Would this controlled mutation cause humankind to evolve or be manufactured? In that world, would we turn out to be the brown bears, losing our resources and our life as we know it to these more advanced relatives of ours with genetically engineered white fur?